Welcome to Let's Therapy, where we get real and raw about your mental health, faith, and blended family. We're your hosts, counselors Scott and Vanessa Martindale. Now let's therapy.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Let's Therapy. I am here today with a very special guest, Dan Ennaco, who is actually one of our BKF team members. He is our videographer, but Dan also has a PhD in clinical psychology. So Dan, you're kind of like a jack of all trades. And I love that because you and Scott kind of speak the same language, when it comes to therapy and psychology and behavioral things. And so I'm excited to have you on the podcast today and dive into some of these issues.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yes. Well, you guys, today we're going to be talking about overcoming an upbringing where someone in your family had mental health issues. And a lot of the topics that we're talking about, we're really grabbing from the audience. And so if you follow our social media or if you're subscribed to our newsletter, we'll often send out emails asking, for your feedback and for the topics that you want us to cover. And so this was one of the ones that was sent into us. And so talking about, family members who have had mental health issues and maybe even how that can affect you as a child or can even be passed down. Dan, I know growing up, my mom struggled with depression and addiction is something that also kind of ran in our family. And it was something that as I was growing up and in college and a young adult, I actually struggled with as well. And so we just want to talk, kind of talk through that and some of the things that we can do to help maybe remedy some of those things and maybe just talk about some ways to help prevent that in the future. So acknowledging the impact. So we want to recognize and validate the impact that growing up in an untreated mental disorder household has on your life. And so, I know growing up, I grew up in a house that was kind of dysfunctional. We have this joke in my family where we say we put the fun in dysfunctional.
That's one way to cope, right?
Yeah, right. And so, understanding that, there's something that in the counseling world we call differentiation. And we develop a level of differentiation, and it's really based on our upbringing and the people that we are in contact with the most and the closest to. And so depending on our upbringing, if it was chaotic, if it was stressful, if it was abusive, if it was traumatic, we develop different levels of differentiation. And what differentiation does is it's as we grow up, it's how we then cope with the stressors in our life. And if we have low levels of differentiation, we typically don't cope well. And we develop unhealthy coping mechanisms, and we can develop, and then that can look like substance abuse. It can look like codependency. It can look like so many different things. If you do grow up in a household where maybe mental health or those issues have not been there, you probably have a higher level of differentiation. And so you're able to cope in healthy ways and understand how to cope with the stressors of life and things like that. So understanding that our upbringing may have affected our emotional well-being and relationships overall as we develop. And so Dan, can you speak into that a little bit too? Because I know you've worked with, you worked for, was it 6 years or 7 years with clients?
6 years. I worked for 6 years as a therapist. I specialized in substance abuse treatment. I worked with people with a wide variety of mental health disorders. We call this comorbidity when there's at least two different disorders happening at the same time. And for us, the challenge was, is this due to substance use and abuse? Is this due to depression, anxiety, schizophrenia? Or is it more often than not a combination of all of those factors combined? And I think the biggest thing that comes to me thinking about this topic is it's very difficult to understand mental health issues. Yeah. And it's important for people listening to recognize that it's a big, big problem. Yeah. And it's a bigger problem than a lot of people realize. And you're just not equipped with, one, the understanding, two, the ability to provide recommendations, and three, how do you protect yourself when you're dealing in a family where you have all these difficult factors occurring. Yeah. You brought up differentiation, and interestingly enough, one of my therapy orientations was family systems, and family systems talks a lot about differentiation. Yep. This ability to be close and connected and remained an individual. And that can be very difficult. So if you're growing up in a household where there's severe depression, well, that person may need you a lot of the time. You may become a great people pleaser, a great helper, and you may lose yourself along the way.
Yeah.
So just one example, right, of how mental health disorders, and we call them disorders because they are just that.
Yeah.
They are not something to be taken lightly.
Yeah.
They are not something that just goes away over time. They require treatment.
Yeah.
So how do you remain an individual, protect yourself, and stay close and connected with others? And some of the points we're going to go over today, I think, help us do that.
No, that's so good. Yeah, everything that you said, like, totally resonated with. And it's so true. I think that, looking back, like, even on my upbringing, I can see where, like, there's things called the triangle, right? You have like a child-focused triangle. You have something that's called the drama triangle, and it's where you have two people who can be experiencing anxiety, so to speak, and you bring in a buffer. And sometimes that can be a child. Sometimes if it's, you and your sibling aren't getting along, you're bringing in your spouse. And like you said, in that process, you then take on their anxiety, their stress, and that affects you internally. But also, like you said, like, you can lose connectivity that way, which if you go into attachment styles, like, that's a whole nother subject, but we'll have to go into that sometime. But you can even develop an avoidant attachment style or an anxious attachment style from that. And so Dan, let's go through like some of these points that you were talking about. One, seeking professional help. I know Scott and I talk about it all the time. We're huge proponents of biblical counseling. We do it every day. We see the benefits, but maybe for some of those who are listening that have not experienced that or maybe have a fear to, can you kind of talk through that?
Yeah, of course. Going back to what I said earlier, you may not be knowledgeable about what helps.
Yeah.
And one thing that professionals offer is their expertise.
Yeah.
Now, it is important to find a professional that you can, you feel close to, that you can connect with, you can mesh with, that they understand you, you feel seen, you feel heard.
Yeah.
And they have an expertise in the area you need help in. So there are people that specialize in trauma care. A lot of my training and my work was in trauma-informed care. So what is trauma? What does it look like? Well, sorry to tell you, it looks very different from person to person.
Yeah.
And that's the same for anxiety. That's the same for depression, schizophrenia. That's the same for the personality disorders. While we can use the DSM, the Diagnostical Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, to understand and provide definitions, the way the person comes into your office or into that clinic, it may look very different from that. There are characteristics, but they don't always present the same.
Yeah.
So the professional offers expertise that we need. I think there is an unfortunate stigma still in 2023 around people, like you said, Vanessa, seeking help.
Yeah.
And I just encourage people to go anyways, to ask for help anyways. Maybe you're scared. Maybe you're afraid. Maybe you feel like you have maybe a preconceived notion about how it will go. The courage to show up anyways is huge. That might be the game changer in your life. And I've had people sitting in office with me, and I've worked with colleagues that say, you know what, this person didn't want to be there on day one, but even just 2 weeks later, they found a life and they walked into a life that they didn't know they could have because they showed up.
Yeah.
So the professional offers expertise, and that's just where the work begins.
Yeah.
I've had people, and just to finish up this point, I've had people that when they receive a diagnosis, it is refreshing.
Yeah.
It is relieving because it says, oh, hold on a second. In my head, I can now wrap up these symptoms into something called depression, something called anxiety, something called, and fill in whatever they're struggling with. So the seeking professional help is huge. And being able to push ourselves past that comfort zone to get the help we need, that's huge. And that's a skill that transfers to all areas of life, I would say.
Absolutely. And, I think the enemy, so many people struggle with it because I think the enemy, like, it's the playing the narrative in our mind that we're less than, or that we're just like, we're broken, or whatever it is that, the stigma that you said around counseling of why people don't want to go. But when we can push past that, just like you said, Dan, and seek that help. Because you guys, the thing with professional help is that it supports you as you navigate through the challenges. And we're talking about our upbringing. So navigating through that, getting to the root of like, why am I acting the way that I'm acting, my behaviors? Where does this all stem from? What is the root of this? And a lot of times it goes back to when we were young and our upbringing and our childhood. The other thing that I love about therapy is as you process your experiences, you can develop those healthy coping strategies, like we were talking about, healthy or unhealthy, and work towards the healing and the growth. And it is a process, like you were saying, Dan. It takes time, you guys. And I just want to encourage you, you got to be patient with yourself. Be patient with your counselor as well. And it is important to find somebody that you connect with and that you trust. Developing that foundation of trust is imperative.
And also, I think just on that point, knowing that there are many providers out there,
Yes.
there are many professionals.
Yes.
So you may find that you go and you visit with someone, you do that initial intake and you're like, I don't know, it doesn't really seem to fit. That's okay too.
Yeah.
I even have had people that I've provided a referral to a colleague because I thought that colleague, that professional was a better fit for that person.
Yes.
And the professional is always keeping in mind the best practice and the best help for the client.
Yes. No, that's so good. Yeah. I know Scott has done the same as well. We do that here at our counseling center. If it's, if somebody's struggling with an eating disorder, well, there are therapists out there that specialize in that. And so, I know that the as a therapist, you want your client to find the best help that they can get. And so, like you said, it may be referring them out, or maybe you've been seeing your therapist for a year now and it's time to graduate, so to speak, or it's that, hey, I think we've gotten to a certain point in this relationship, but, I think it would be best if you went to XYZ counselor or therapist, whatever, and that they can take them to that next step, so to speak.
That's a good point.
Well, that's good. Another point to make, when you're overcoming an upbringing, from someone in your family that had mental health issues, I think it's just educating yourself. I think you said it earlier, Dan, you were talking about like a lot of times you don't know how to deal with that. I didn't ask for that. I didn't ask to have a parent that had schizophrenia or had a bipolar disorder or whatever that may be. So I think educating yourself on what those things are, or maybe even like some of the patterns in your family, if you come from a family that, generations of suffering with depression and anxiety, what is that? What does it look like? What did that look like for your parents? And if that is something that you're struggling with, obviously like, getting the resources that you need, getting the help that you need, and getting plugged into a counselor.
Yeah. This idea that knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And we're fortunate in that we can get on the internet and look up stuff. And there are some great resources out there. And then when you combine that with professional help, you get this nice combination of empowering myself and being empowered by a professional. Yeah. And then you make, I think, healthier choices.
No, that's so good. Another thing that we have on here is establishing healthy boundaries. Maybe you're still dealing with family members that are struggling with mental health disorders or issues, and how you were talking about that earlier, Dan, like how do we protect ourselves and how do we put those boundaries around us so that doesn't begin to affect us in a negative way, or that we start taking on their issues or their problems.
Yeah, this idea that we all have an impact on each other. And when you come from an upbringing or you're currently dealing with somebody else and their mental health symptoms and what's going on in the day-to-day life, that acknowledging that could be very draining, that could be very exhausting.
Yep.
And where do we fit in that mix? We want to help that person. We care for that person. We love that person deeply. And there is a skill in knowing how helpful we can actually be and being realistic about our own abilities. Yeah. Because I think sometimes you can get kind of stuck in this quicksand of, I want to be there. And you kind of pop up after a while and you're like, wait, I haven't really been much help. And I'm kind of messed up too. I'm really struggling, right?
Yeah.
So being able to take that step back, as difficult as it is and as challenging as it is, it's so necessary. And it goes into those other points, having the professional consultations. Maybe it's not sometimes about individual therapy. Maybe it's about family therapy or family consults. Even if you don't go totally into a therapy setting, being able to reach out for resources. And, there's so many out there. Even pastors at church, being able to go into a pastoral counseling type setting and say, hey, can you help me out? Help
Yeah.
me learn about this. And just having someone where you can bounce those ideas off that aren't that person that's really struggling because they're struggling with what they have going on. How helpful can they really be in that moment?
Yeah.
And so having that objective third party helps us protect ourselves and be realistic about our abilities.
Man, that's so good, Dan. I love that. Yeah. I mean, and it's the self-awareness that comes with it. And that is something, we develop over time. A lot of times, again, with those levels of differentiation comes the ability to be self-aware of hey, this isn't healthy, this situation or this conversation, and being able to remove yourself from that. Or when you see certain behaviors starting to pop up, what boundaries and parameters am I going to put around this to say, hey, when this comes up, I'm going to excuse myself, or if you do this and I tell you this and you don't honor that, this is the consequence of that, so to speak.
I like that practical example.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes these conversations can be very abstract,
Yeah.
and it's helpful to think of it, what does setting boundaries look like? Like you said, Vanessa, if this comes up, I'm going to walk away.
Yeah.
And I'm doing that for both of us.
Yeah.
I'm doing that because the circumstances right now don't cultivate a healthy conversation.
Yeah.
They're not going to get to the solution. And
Yep.
so saying, if this comes up, and being assertive with that and being respectful with that
Yeah.
assertion, that communication, and saying, this happens, I'm going to walk away. Let's talk about it in 10 minutes. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Let me go pray on this and come back with some wisdom so that we can work through that.
Yeah, we were working with a teen recently, and there was a lot of mom and dad speaking negatively about each other in front of the teen. And when asking this teen, how do you navigate that? And he was saying that he's like, I just don't say anything. And we started to talk about the toleration and what, and this teen's about to be, he's going off to college, and how do you want that to be different, and drawing those boundaries. And one of the things that we talked about was him just saying to both parents, hey, please do not dishonor my mom or dad in front of me. I don't appreciate that, because it's like what we'll tolerate from our parents, like maybe later on in his relationships, as he's dating or when he gets engaged or married, is he going to tolerate what his parents might say or not say about his spouse? And drawing those boundaries now to say, hey, please don't say these things in front of me. And if you do, then I'm going to leave, or whatever that is. And like you said, being firm in that. And so I think that's a great example. And then the next three things that we have, they kind of all flow together, but it's practicing self-care, focusing on personal growth, and practicing self-compassion, which I know is hard. Like for me, self-care, Scott gets on to me about this all the time. He's like, you do not take care of yourself enough. You're taking care of everybody else. And it's so important because we want to, in order for us to continue to have the joy and love the things that we do, like we have to take that time to renew and refresh ourselves, and understanding what are the things that that are refreshing to me, but understanding the things that just like renew like my soul. Also doing that soul care. That's why it's so important to spend that time with the Lord, to get into his presence. Maybe it's going on a women's Bible retreat or, a women's conference. For me personally, I love doing things like that because it just I just feel like it just renews and refreshes my soul. But focusing on your own personal growth, like what things are you implementing on a day-to-day basis, or even it could be a weekly basis, a monthly basis, that's helping you grow in the things that you want to achieve, or the things that are related to your relationships, your marriage, your personal development, your career, education, things like that. And then practicing self-compassion. I think that we can all be so hard on ourselves. We're our own worst critic, and just giving ourselves the grace and the place to have that grace can be difficult.
Yeah, and I like this idea of celebrating your progress.
Oh, that's good.
You go and you have these hard conversations, you seek professional help, and giving yourself a pat on the back.
Yeah.
When we recognize those small wins, they actually cultivate motivation to keep going. And sometimes society says, it's just what you have to do. And I heard this a lot with clients in substance abuse. I'm trying to give them praise for being sober for 6 months or a year, and they never have. This might be a 40-year-old person that's never, for more than 6 months, been sober since they were a teenager.
Wow.
And I'm saying, this is incredible. Let's give ourselves some praise here. And they say, it's just what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it just diminishes all of that progress. And then those that over time learn that there's power in recognizing what we're doing well, recognizing that we had that hard conversation, we set that boundary, we went on that walk, we took our lunch break, we did things that were, like you said, going to a retreat that helps you establish a sense of community and connectedness and recharges you, going into that prayer closet and really coming out rejuvenated, recognizing that is so, so important.
That's good. No, that is so good. Yes, celebrate the wins. That's so important because it can get so easy to just like continue to just keep doing what we're doing, right? And then we also lose sight of the blessing on what God's trying to do in and through us, like through the process or in that season. And so it's always good because we want to give praise to him for the incredible work that he's doing within us. And so, no, this is good. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we're at the end of our time, but you guys, we hope that this has blessed you. We hope that you've taken away some practical and spiritual tips from this, but we look forward to seeing you next week, and we pray that you are blessed in all that you do.